So how do you win your 2022 fantasy draft? You take the number one value in each round. But what does this look like exactly? Well, let's discuss. Now, assuming you don't have a top 4 overall pick, I'd be taking Stefan Diggs. Diggs leads the NFL with 330 targets over the last 2 years since he joined Buffalo and was paired up with Josh Allen. And he possesses the fantasy cheat codes for a wide receiver. Diggs was top 10 in both deep targets and red zone targets last year. He was actually second in the league in those red zone targets. That combination is lethal for fantasy. So you grab Diggs, and now you'll want this next running back in round 2. And that man's name is Aaron Jones, who to me is a first-round running back, potentially even a top 5 overall pick, but you can get him in the second round of drafts. And he's as consistent as they come. He's averaged a 6th overall finish at the running back position over the last 3 years. 11th last year while dealing with injury for most of the season. And this year, he has Christian McCaffrey upside, meaning he has the opportunity and skill set to be a number 1 running back and a number 1 receiver. Because since 2019, Aaron Jones, without Devontae Adams, who's now gone and in Las Vegas, averages 25.9, basically 26 fantasy points per game. And this would have ranked number 1 overall amongst all players, including quarterbacks like Josh Allen last year. So we know Aaron Jones is good on the ground, but this is where that Christian McCaffrey upside comes into play. He was top 10 last year, 7th overall in targets at the running back position, and he was basically top 10 in efficiency, production on his yards per touch. So we already know he's good when he gets the opportunity, and now more is going to come without Adams and even MVS in the fold in Green Bay. So when you throw more volume on this situation that Jones has been in as a top 6 running back on average the last 3 years, his upside clearly skyrockets. And now you want Jones in round 2, and you'll want this next wide receiver in round 3. And that would be DJ Moore, who currently goes outside the top 12 wide receivers in the 3rd round of drafts. And to me, he's the best 3rd round value, who now is going to get to play with the best quarterback of his career. Yes, I did not stutter, in Baker Mayfield. Let me explain. Last year, DJ Moore ranked 4th in unrealized air yards, meaning he was getting a lot of targets and yardage downfield, but it wasn't being converted on. And this was due to Sam Darnold ranking 31st amongst all quarterbacks. There's only 32 teams in deep ball accuracy. And overall last year, he was 29th in true completion percentage. This is not good. However, Baker Mayfield, in his 3 healthy seasons before last year playing through a separated shoulder the entire year, has averaged a top 10 finish in deep ball accuracy. In 2020, he was 6th. In his rookie year, he was 9th. And in his sophomore year, he was 13th. Solid every year. So draft DJ Moore and then take this next wide receiver in round 4. Now, despite poor production last year, Allen Robinson was still top 15 at getting open, winning versus man coverage. And now he finds himself on a new team, the Los Angeles Rams, with the quarterback who ranked 1st in the NFL last year versus man coverage in Matt Stafford. But the QB upgrade doesn't stop here. Last year, Allen Robinson ranked 72nd amongst wide receivers. Not great, outside of the top 2 wide receivers per team, right? 32 teams in the league. 72nd in catchable target rate. 29% of the targets coming his way weren't even catchable. And this was due to Justin Fields ranking 33rd in the league in accuracy rating. We just said how bad Sam Darnold was as 29th. Fields was even worse than that. However, Matt Stafford was top 10 in true completion percentage just last year. Plus, everything coming out of Rams camp right now is positive on Allen Robinson. He is the number 1 talking point out of Rams camp. They're describing him as Robert Woods, except he's bigger, which is good in the red zone, more athletic, and more versatile. And we already know Woods was fantastic in this offense. Wheels up for Allen Robinson. And while we're talking about accurate quarterbacks like Matthew Stafford, you're going to want to take Kyla Murray in round 5 this year, who led the NFL in true completion percentage last year. But anybody can just check it down and get a high completion percentage. That's not what Kyler was doing. He led the NFL in Pro Football stat of big time throw rate, meaning that he was making difficult throws, and even while doing those at the number 1 rate in the league, he was still 1st in completion percentage. Translation, he was elite last year. And not to mention, he obviously possesses the fantasy cheat codes for quarterbacks. And that's because whatever metric you look at, he was basically top 5 in terms of rushing for quarterbacks last year. And if you go over to his red zone carries, he was top 5 last year with 20, but in his career, he has 64 across 3 seasons. That is top 4 in the NFL over that time. So here's another way to look at this. Kyler Murray currently goes as the quarterback 5 in drafts in the 5th round, which is 29 picks after Josh Allen, even though he has similar upside to Allen. Now, this next wide receiver is rising quickly in drafts, but you can still get him in round 6. And that's Lions wide receiver Amon-Ra St. Brown, who has top 10 upside. Yet he currently goes in drafts as the 30th wide receiver off the board. This is a mistake. Here's what you need to know about St. Brown. As a rookie rookie last year, he was a top 25 wide receiver in the league at beating man coverage. And getting open that often contributed to a massive second half of the year performance. He was 5th amongst all wide receivers in fantasy points in the second half of the year. Now check this out. These are the only wide receivers that were better than him: Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, Devontae Adams, and Deebo Samuel. The 4 best wide receivers in fantasy last year. Now you might be saying, oh, but TJ Hawkinson missed time and Swift was out. That is correct, but it's a good thing that Amon-Ra was able to get open when all the attention was on him. Now with those guys back, there'll be less defensive attention on him. Plus, St. Brown runs different routes on the field than Hawkinson and the running back out of the backfield and DeAndre Swift. And those routes correlate really well with where Jared Goff, the quarterback, succeeds. So you want to secure St. Brown, and then you can get this next running back even later. Now, last year at this time in fantasy football, Miles Sanders was going 35th overall, so a 3rd round pick in 12-team leagues. And he ended up producing really good numbers. He was number 3 in true yards per carry. He was top 10 in yards per touch amongst running backs. He was really efficient in 2021. And he played in the number 1 rushing offense in terms of volume last year. Over 32 run plays per game were called in Philadelphia. So he must have had a great season, right? And not quite. Sanders scored 0 touchdowns on 163 touches. Talk about unlucky. And he dealt with injury for about 35% of his games, a hand fracture and an ankle sprain. But check this out. Sanders now goes as the running back 26th in the 7th round of fantasy drafts, which is a 4-round drop from last year simply because he was unlucky in terms of touchdowns and injuries. Now get this. He's now healthy and he's running behind Pro Football Focus's number 1 overall offensive line. And they have a lot of depth on this offensive line. Plus, the Eagles didn't draft any running backs this year. The only guy they have is Kennedy Brooks, who was an undrafted free agent who was productive in college, but he's not going to threaten for RB1 touches. He might not even make the team. So expect Sanders to pay off for you in the 7th round. And similar things can be said for this 8th round running back. And that would be Chase Edmonds, who, get this, because this is important to know. It's a little bit of a tidbit for you. He was the first running back off the market in free agency, meaning that the Dolphins and other teams had a lot of interest in him. And if there's a lot of interest in the player, it likely means he's going to get paid a decent amount of money. And his $6 million per year contract is about 3 times more than any other running back on the Dolphins, which means they're incentivized to use him a good amount. Now check out this recent piece of news. Raheem Mozart has not yet taken full participation in practice. He's just getting back up to speed in camp. He's running, but he's not cutting as hard, so he might not be ready for week 1. And if that's the case, it would increase the chances at Edmonds earning workhorse usage to start the season. Now this is important because since he entered the NFL, he's been a top 10 running back in yards per touch, production per touch. He's up there with Tony Pollard, Derrick Henry, Aaron Jones, some really good running backs. And right now in my top 200, I have Chase Edmonds as my 66th overall player, so he's like a 5th to 6th round pick in my opinion, but he goes in the 7th to 8th round of drafts. And if you'd like to see the rest of my top 200, my tiers and rankings, my wants and avoids list updated every Friday, then simply click the link in the description and follow the 2 quick steps to acquire your Supreme cheat sheet. And I'll throw in a $20 Amazon gift card for you. And if you don't enjoy the Supreme cheat sheet, I'll refund you $10 minimum deposit, what it takes to get it, and you can keep the $20 gift card. So if you want to join the hundreds of other people utilizing the cheat sheet right now, click the link in the description to learn more. So we're going to target Edmonds in round 8, and then you want this elite tight end in round 9. And that would be Eagles tight end Dallas Goddard, who last year was the number 1 tight end in yards per route run and best efficiency metric for receivers and or tight ends. Now get this, last year once Zach Ertz was traded, there was 10 more games that Goddard played without him. And in those games, he saw 34% more targets per game, nearly 6 per game, and 17% more fantasy points per game. He was basically a top 5 tight end week in and week out. But there is one concern. Goddard only saw 6 red zone targets last year and 5 the year before that, just 11 over the last 2 seasons. Now this is due to Philly's high red zone rush rate, but the front offense wants to throw more this year, hence why they added AJ Brown. And if that indeed ends up being the case, then top 3 tight end upside is in the cards for Goddard. Now in the 10th round of your drafts, you want to be targeting Tyler Boyd, who over the last 3 years averages a top 30 wide receiver finish. Now despite this, he currently goes outside the top 50 wide receivers in fantasy drafts as the 51st wide receiver taken. But Boyd has a safe floor and a major ceiling, because last year in 2 games without T. Higgins, Boyd averaged 17.2 fantasy points per game, which was top 5 numbers. So he has that upside if Higgins misses. And then in 2020, before Joe Burrow injured his knee, he was averaging 16.2 fantasy points per game, top 20 wide receiver numbers, and that was when Jamar Chase wasn't there. So this translates to if either Chase or Higgins miss time this year, which is likely for a receiver to miss time in the NFL, especially one of 2, then Boyd's ceiling instantly becomes a top 10 wide receiver week in and week out for those games. So this is a great strategy to follow to win your fantasy draft. Now, if you want to see 5 more players that you should be drafting sooner in drafts before your friends, then check out this beautiful video right here. And when your friends are saying, how do you keep beating us by 40 points a week? Only you will know. And hit subscribe if you have not yet already.